This episode of the Quantum Space Innovating Trust podcast is brought to you in association with Vibu Systems, pioneers in software protection, licensing, and long-term digital trust. Quantum computing is no longer theoretical, and it poses a fundamental challenge to today's cryptography. Methods like RSA and ECC will not survive the quantum era. With its next code meter generation, Vibu Systems is already preparing a smooth, compatible transition to post-quantum ready security across hardware, software, and cloud licensing. Discover how CodeMeter is being engineered for the post-quantum future and why preparing early is the only safe strategy. Visit vibu.com/PQC today.
The conversation around post-quantum cryptography is moving quickly, but much of it is still anchored in algorithms, standards, and implementation timelines. And that view only takes you so far. What sits underneath is a deeper structural change in how trust is built, measured, and sustained across digital systems. This episode is built around the latest Quantum Space quarterly white paper, which we've titled The Quantum Ready Trust Stack. It's an original piece of research that steps back from the technical transition and looks at the architecture forming around it, not just what is changing, but how those changes begin to reshape the foundations that digital systems rely upon. We describe that foundation as the post-quantum trust stack. It brings together identity, cryptography, security, and technology into a single operational model. Identity as participation in systems that now demand stronger forms of assurance. Cryptography as something that defines the usable lifespan of data and infrastructure. Security as a question of accountability, where responsibility can be traced and tested. And technology as an expression of sovereignty, shaped by control, dependency, and jurisdiction. These are no longer abstract layers. They're being formalized through regulation, procurement, and operational policy. Across Europe, frameworks such as the EIDAS 2.0, the Cyber Resilience Act, NIS2, and the AI Act are beginning to set expectations that reach well beyond compliance checklists. They are defining how trust must now function in practice. At the same time, systems are being pushed towards a new standard of proof. It is no longer enough for infrastructures to operate. It must demonstrate that it operates correctly, consistently, and under scrutiny. And that shift carries technical consequences, but it also carries legal and commercial weight. The trust stack, in that context, becomes something that can be interrogated, validated, and, when necessary, challenged. In this episode, we take the white paper as a working model and examine how it holds up against real-world deployment, where it aligns with current practice, where it introduces friction, and where organizations will need to rethink how they approach trust as an operational capability. And to do that, I'm joined once again by Maya Hartman and James Calloway. Maya, James, over to you.
You know, when you sit down and really look at the history of massive infrastructure projects.
Right, the big ones.
Yeah, things like the interstate highway system or the transatlantic telegraph cables or even the Hoover Dam. There's always this underlying expectation of permanence.
Absolutely. It's a core principle of civil engineering.
Exactly. You survey the land, you pour the concrete, you lay the steel, and you point to that physical structure and say, with absolute confidence, that is going to hold for a century.
It's a very comforting thought, certainly. And I mean, that permanence is kind of built into our collective psyche because it relies on the immutable laws of physics.
Right.
Gravity isn't going to suddenly change its mind tomorrow. The tensile strength of steel doesn't just degrade because someone invented a new mathematical equation.
But then you step out of the physical world and into the world of digital identity.
Yeah, and that's where things get shaky.
Specifically, you look at the infrastructure that Europe is building right now, and suddenly that concrete starts looking a lot more like, I don't know, ice in the spring.
That's a great way to put it.
We're looking at a foundational architectural landscape that is, by its very nature, temporary.
It is the absolute definition of a ticking clock. And it's a clock that most organizations don't even realize is running.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are talking directly to you today, the senior decision maker. The person whose job isn't just to look at, the next quarterly earnings report, but to figure out how to keep your organization secure, operationally resilient, compliant, and literally legally viable for the next decade and beyond.
It's a huge mandate.
It really is.
Yeah.
Right now, Europe is currently building the most consequential digital identity infrastructure in its entire history. We're talking about the European Digital Identity Wallet, or the EUDI wallet.
Right.
The stated goal is that this infrastructure is designed to last for decades. It's meant to be the absolute bedrock of the European digital economy. But the mathematical foundation it's being built on has a fast-approaching expiration date.
It creates a fascinating and, frankly, kind of a terrifying paradox.
Yeah.
I mean, we're deploying a system meant to secure the digital lives, the finances, the healthcare records of hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
But the cryptography making it safe is actively depreciating in value every single day.
And to understand the operational and strategic implications of this, we're unpacking a May 2026 Executive Intelligence Report titled The Quantum Ready Trust Stack.
Published by the Quantum Space or TQS?
Yeah, it's TQS. And I want to set a very clear ground rule right at the top here. Our mission today is not to give you a theoretical physics lecture.
No, please no.
We are not going to force you to sit through a summary of Schrödinger's cat.
I think we can all agree to leave the quantum superposition thought experiments to the academic journals.
Agreed. We're also not doing some dry, line-by-line summary of lattice-based algorithms just for the sake of exploring math. Instead, the goal is to translate this white paper into a strategic blueprint.
Exactly.
We're going to fundamentally change how you think about trust, how you think about security, and how you measure long-term risk in your organization. Because we need to move away from treating cryptography as this invisible layer of IT plumbing that you just assume works.
That assumption is basically the most dangerous vulnerability an organization has today.
Wow, really? The most dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have to start treating cryptographic resilience as a core component of business liability. It's a boardroom issue, not just, an IT help desk ticket.
Okay, let's establish the baseline. The TQS report talks about digital identity officially entering its industrial phase with the rollout of IDACE 2.0.
Right.
But the listener might be thinking, look, I've had a digital identity for 15 years. I log into my banking portal. I use single sign-on for my corporate network. I pay my taxes online.
Yeah.
So what does this shift to an industrial phase actually mean in practical terms? How is this fundamentally different from what we've been doing since the smartphone was invented?
It's different in kind, not just in scale. To really understand the industrial phase, we have to look at what we're leaving behind.
Okay.
For most of the past decade, digital identity, especially in Europe, but globally as well, was essentially a policy concept mixed with fragmented convenience.
Meaning what exactly?
Well, you had the original IDACE regulation from 2014, which established some early legal frameworks, but actual adoption was incredibly siloed.
So you might use a specific digital ID to pay your taxes in Germany, but if you tried to use that exact same ID to open a bank account in France, it meant absolutely nothing.
Precisely. It was pre-industrial. Think of it like craftsmen making bespoke tools in different villages.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. The tools work locally, but there's no interoperability, there's no standardization, and no overarching infrastructure. And in that pre-industrial phase, trust was primarily institutional.
Break that down for me. Institutional trust.
It means that you trusted an institution, a bank, a telecom provider, a specific government agency to verify the person on the other end of the transaction.
Okay, that makes sense.
If I send you a digital contract, you trust it because the platform we're using is backed by a recognized institution. And critically, if something goes wrong, there's a human in the loop.
Right.
If your bank account is flagged for fraud or, your digital login fails, you can physically walk into a branch, hand a human being your paper passport, and they override the system.
So the technology was really just a convenience layer built on top of a highly manual human process.
Exactly. But IIDs 2.0 changes that paradigm entirely. It takes digital identity from being an optional, fragmented convenience and turns it into mandatory production infrastructure.
That's the core of the industrial phase, right?
Yeah. We're shifting from institutional trust to cryptographic trust. And this is a massive conceptual leap.
So
Well, the EUDI wallet doesn't ask you to trust a government official or a bank manager to tell you a credential is valid. It asks you to trust a mathematical proof.
Right.
That proof is generated by an algorithm running on certified hardware.
So there is absolutely no human in the loop at the point of verification.
None. When a citizen uses their wallet to present a verified credential, say, proving they're over 18 to access a restricted service, or signing a legally binding commercial contract, the verifier system runs a mathematical calculation.
Okay.
It either mathematically verifies as true or it fails. There's no gray area and there's no human supervisor to appeal to in real time. You are trusting the math.
And when you look at the scale of what's being mandated, the stakes become staggering. We're talking about 450 million EU citizens.
Big, massive.
The regulation stipulates that every member state must offer this wallet. And by 2027, major online platforms, banks, healthcare systems, transport networks, they are all legally obligated to accept it. This isn't just some pilot program running in a sandbox.
No, it is the definition of critical infrastructure. The white paper places the EUDI wallet in the exact same risk category as SWIFT for international banking, or the DNS system that routes the global internet.
That's a serious comparison.
It has to be. If this identity infrastructure fails, or if the trust underpinning it is compromised, it causes cascading operational failures across healthcare, finance, and governance across an entire continent.
Okay, so let me stop right there because this is where the logic just seems to fall off a cliff.
Okay, hit me.
If we are building a digital highway for 450 million people, and it's going to be the central nervous system of the European economy, why are we paving it with asphalt we know is going to melt in 10 years?
And that is the big question.
Right. Because we're deploying this massive infrastructure right now using legacy classical algorithms. We're relying on RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC.
Yeah.
And we are doing this while quantum computers are visibly progressing from theory to engineering reality. Why on earth are we building tomorrow's critical infrastructure with yesterday's math?
I mean, it's the ultimate engineering dilemma. You're forced to build with the materials available today, even when you know the operational lifetime of the infrastructure extends into a future where those materials are obsolete.
But why?
Because right now, RSA and ECC are the global standards. They are baked into every mobile phone, every server, every smart card, every root certificate on the planet. To build a system today, you have to use today's tools.
But you just said the industrial phase relies entirely on cryptographic trust. It relies purely on the math. So what happens when time itself becomes the enemy of that math?
That is the central thesis of the first section of the TQS report. We have to fundamentally reevaluate how we think about cryptography.
Well,
For decades, the security industry has thought about cryptography as a measure of strength. We ask, how strong is this encryption? We talk about 2048-bit keys or 256-bit curves. We visualize it as a vault with increasingly thick steel walls.
because against a classical computer, RSA 2048 is incredibly strong. I mean, it's essentially unbreakable, isn't it?
Exactly. A classical computer operates on bits, ones, and zeros. To break RSA, a classical computer basically has to guess the prime factors of an incredibly massive number.
Right.
It has to check every possible combination one by one. Even if you took all the computing power currently on Earth and ran it continuously, it would take longer than the age of the universe to crack a single high-entropy RSA key. So yes, from a classical perspective, it is a very thick steel vault.
But a quantum computer doesn't operate like a classical computer. It doesn't check the combinations one by one.
No, it operates on qubits, which can exist in a state of superposition representing multiple states simultaneously. And this brings us to Shor's algorithm.
Right, Peter Shor.
Yeah, Peter Shor published this algorithm back in 1994. It's a quantum algorithm specifically designed to find the prime factors of an integer.
Let's explain the mechanics of that, because it's vital to understand why this isn't just a matter of, computers getting faster. Shor's algorithm doesn't just chip away at RSA, does it?
Not at all. Imagine classical encryption like a massive, incredibly complex physical maze. and you have to find the one correct path to the exit.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
A classical computer enters the maze, hits a dead end, turns around, tries the next path, hits a dead end, and so on. It takes millions of years.
Right.
A quantum computer running Shor's algorithm doesn't just run the maze faster. It essentially floods the entire maze with water all at once, allowing it to instantly see the fluid dynamics of where the exit is.
Wow.
Shor's algorithm exploits quantum interference to amplify the correct mathematical period of a function and cancel out the incorrect ones.
So it turns an impossible universe-spanning mathematical problem into an easy polynomial time calculation. It categorically breaks the foundation of the math.
Exactly. The steel vault doesn't slowly rust. It simply ceases to exist. Against a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, a CRQC, RSA, and ECC fall apart in hours.
Just hours.
Yes. So the question we should be asking in the boardroom isn't, is our encryption strong? The question is, how much time do we have until a quantum computer can run Shor's algorithm at scale?
Cryptography is no longer a measure of strength. It's a measure of lifespan. It's just a mechanism for buying time.
And the amount of time we are buying is shrinking rapidly, which brings us to the most immediate operational threat outlined in the report, the harvest now, decrypt later strategy, or HNDL.
This is the part of the report that really shifts this from a future IT headache to a current strategic crisis.
Yeah.
But let's clarify the scope first.
Okay.
If I send a secure text message to a colleague saying, hey, let's get coffee at 2 p.m., and some adversary intercepts it and decrypts it 10 years from now, I don't care. The intelligence value of that data is essentially zero.
Right, yeah. A standard web browsing session reading the news, a quick logistical text message, a temporary session token, these have incredibly short intelligence lifespans. Yeah. But the EUDI wallet and industrial digital identity in general is entirely different. The data it generates and secures is explicitly designed to be long-lived.
Let's walk through a concrete scenario.
Right.
Let's say I use my EUDI wallet to sign a 30-year commercial mortgage agreement, or I use it to cryptographically sign a binding legal custody agreement.
Or consider verifiable credentials in a healthcare context, a genomic sequence record, a university degree, a sovereign digital currency transaction.
Right.
These documents and the cryptographic signatures proving their authenticity and your identity must remain legally valid and confidential for 15, 20, sometimes 30 years.
So if we look at the harvest now, decrypt later strategy through that lens, I mean, sophisticated adversaries, we're talking about state-level intelligence agencies, they are intercepting and storing encrypted data today. They are siphoning massive amounts of internet traffic.
They cannot read the encrypted payload right now. The classical math still holds, but they don't need to read it now.
They just save it.
Exactly. They're storing it in massive exabyte-scale data centers, simply waiting for the day their quantum computer comes online.
That changes the calculus entirely. The operational clock hasn't just started. We are already actively losing time. Every single long-lived credential presentation, every qualified electronic signature on a sensitive contract happening right now is potentially being archived by an adversary.
The vulnerability is not waiting for us in the future. The vulnerability is being actively generated today to be exploited in the future.
Wow.
If a foreign intelligence agency harvests the encrypted transmission of a classified defense contract signed via the EUDI wallet in 2026 and they decrypt it in 2033, that contract might still be active. The intellectual property is still valuable.
So let's talk about that 2033 date. Because as a decision maker, as someone allocating budget, I need to know when this theoretical physics problem becomes a Tuesday morning crisis for my operations team.
Right.
The white paper cites projections from the Global Risk Institute. What is the actual timeline we're working against?
Predicting the exact arrival of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is difficult because it depends on engineering breakthroughs in error correction and qubit stability.
Sure.
But the Global Risk Institute surveys the world's leading quantum experts. Currently, they estimate a 50% probability of a CRQC existing by 2033.
A coin flip within 7 years.
And they place a 17% probability on it arriving even sooner, by 2026 or 2027.
That is essentially tomorrow. But let's assume the 50% probability for 2033. To a lot of executives, 7 years sounds like a comfortable buffer. It sounds like 2 or 3 budgeting cycles away.
It sounds comfortable until you map it against the historical reality of cryptographic transitions. The white paper points out that large-scale systemic cryptographic migrations historically take anywhere from 5 to 15 years to complete.
Consider the migration from SHA-1 to SHA-2.
A perfect example. That wasn't even a replacement of the core public key infrastructure. It was just an update to a hash function. And yet it took over a decade to fully flush SHA-1 out of global systems. There were broken applications, expired certificates, hardware incompatibilities. Now imagine replacing the foundational algorithms of every public key infrastructure on the planet.
Everything.
Every server, every browser, every root authority, every smart card.
So if the migration process takes 10 years, and the quantum computer arrives in 7 at gun, we are mathematically insolvent today. We're already behind schedule.
Exactly.
Which brings up a very uncomfortable question for the organizational chart. If I am looking at a Fortune 500 company or a major government agency who actually owns long-term cryptographic risk.
That is the blind spot the TQS report highlights so effectively. The terrifying reality is that in most modern organizations, no one clearly owns it. It falls into an accountability gap between different silos.
Let's break that down, because someone listening is probably thinking, well, my CISO owns it. That's what I pay the Chief Information Security Officer for. Why doesn't the CISO own this risk?
Because the CISO is overwhelmingly incentivized and judged on current immediate operational threats.
Right.
Are we being breached today? Are our endpoints secure right now? Did we pass this quarter's compliance audit? Are we patched against the latest ransomware strain?
All short term.
Very. A CISO's average tenure is only a few years. They are rarely incentivized to spend massive political capital and IT budget on a theoretical cryptographic threat that materializes in 2033, long after they have moved to another company.
Okay, what about the legal department? They're the ones managing long-term contracts and corporate liability.
The legal team operates on the assumption that the technology functions as advertised. They assume that if the IADS regulation states a qualified digital signature is legally equivalent to a wedding signature, the IT department has ensured the underlying math stays legally binding.
Yeah, the general counsel is not monitoring the degradation rate of elliptic curve cryptography.
Exactly. They wouldn't even know where to look.
And the infrastructure or IT operations team?
Their mandate is stability. Keep the lights on. Ensure uptime, performance, and scalability. They implement the technical standards they're given by industry bodies. They do not unilaterally invent and deploy entirely new post-quantum cryptographic architectures on a whim.
So it falls completely through the cracks. It's an orphaned risk. The CISO is looking at today, legal is looking at the contract text, and infrastructure is looking at server uptime.
Precisely.
But let me challenge this from the perspective of a CFO or a really pragmatic board member.
Yeah.
I can hear them listening to this and saying, okay, the timeline is uncertain. 50% by 2033 means there's a 50% chance it doesn't happen by 2033. If NIST is still finalizing standards and the technology might get cheaper or easier to implement in 5 years, why not wait? Why spend the capital in 2026 when we could wait until the threat is actually knocking on the door?
It is a completely rational financial question, but it ignores the operational reality of how the UDI wallet and long-lived data function.
How so?
As we established, the operational clock on the data has already started. Let's say you're a major European bank. You issue a 10-year verifiable credential to a customer's wallet today using classical cryptography.
Okay.
That credential will still be active, still in the wild, and still being relied upon for access and verification when a quantum computer comes online.
And you can't just press a button and unissue it easily across a decentralized ecosystem if the underlying mathematical foundation is fundamentally compromised.
Exactly. Delaying the migration doesn't save you money. It just guarantees that when the migration is eventually forced upon you, either by an actual quantum breach or a sudden, panicked regulatory mandate, it will be chaotic, rushed, and exponentially more expensive.
It's a panic scenario.
You won't be managing a structured IT transition. You'll be managing a corporate crisis.
Yeah.
You'll be paying premium rates for consultants to hot-fix systems that were never designed to be upgraded.
It's like ignoring a slow systemic leak in the foundation of a building because the roof hasn't caved in yet. The water damage is compounding invisibly. And to really understand why this migration is so fiercely difficult and why you can't just wait and push a software patch in 2032, we need to stop thinking about cryptography as an invisible layer. We need to look at how trust is structurally engineered into our systems.
And that leads directly into the second major theme of the report: the architecture of trust versus our assumptions about it. The white paper introduces an operational model called the TQS trust stack.
Let's get into the trust stack.
It's vital to understand this because most executives assume trust is a binary state. A system is either secure or it isn't.
Let's unpack it. It breaks trust down into 5 interdependent layers. Walk me through them.
The 5 layers are ownership, responsibility, control, participation, and time.
Let's define each one so we have a shared vocabulary here. Layer 1 is ownership.
Ownership is hardware and infrastructure sovereignty. Who physically controls the silicon chips, the data center servers, the undersea cables? Where does the physical infrastructure actually sit?
Okay, layer 2 is responsibility.
This is cybersecurity, accountability, and operational resilience. It's the governance layer. Who's managing the risk, and crucially, who carries the legal liability when it breaks?
Layer 3 is control.
Control encompasses algorithmic governance, automated decision-making, and AI. How does the system behave autonomously? What are the rules governing the software?
Got it. Layer 4 is participation.
This is the digital identity and access management layer. This is where the EUDI wallet interacts. Who gets to use the system? What are their credentials? How do we verify them?
And finally, the foundational layer, layer 5, time.
Time is cryptography. It is the ability to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of the other layers over an extended duration. And here is the crucial insight from the white paper.
Yeah.
The quantum threat doesn't just attack the participation layer. It doesn't just attack the identity credential. It attacks the foundational layer of time.
Wow.
Because every other layer, ownership, responsibility, control, participation, relies entirely on cryptography to enforce its security properties. Attacking the time layer causes a catastrophic cascade failure through the entire stack.
Consider the mechanics of that for a second.
Yeah.
If the cryptography fails, you no longer control who participates. You no longer control the algorithmic behavior. Your governance and responsibility models collapse because you can't prove who did what. The whole stack implodes.
Exactly. It's a foundational collapse.
Let's make this concrete. Let's map this trust stack to the actual physical and software architecture of the European Digital Identity Wallet. Because the wallet isn't just a piece of software you download from an app store. There is a deeply integrated hardware component.
Yeah, the EUDI wallet architecture relies on 2 critical components working in tandem. First, you have the WSCA, the Wallet Secure Cryptographic Application. Second, you have the WSCD, the Wallet Secure Cryptographic Device.
Application and device, software and hardware.
Yes. The WSCA, the software application, manages the user interface. It manages the policy engines, the interaction with verifiers, the display of your credentials. It's what you interact with on the screen.
Right.
But the WSCD, the hardware device, is the actual cryptographic vault. It generates the private keys, it stores them securely, and it physically executes the mathematical operations required to sign a credential. It is engineered to be physically tamper-resistant.
So when we talk about migrating an entire continent to quantum-safe cryptography, we aren't just talking about pushing an over-the-air software update to the WSCA. We're talking about fundamentally altering how the WSCD or the hardware vault operates.
And this is where the operational nightmare begins for infrastructure planners. You essentially have 2 architectural paths for deploying that hardware vault. You can use secure elements, or you can use hardware security modules, commonly known as HSMs.
Let's look at secure elements first. A secure element is the physical, dedicated security chip built directly into a smartphone, right?
Correct. It is a highly constrained, physically isolated chip inside your device. It offers incredible offline sovereignty. Your cryptographic keys never leave your physical phone. From the ownership layer of the trust stack, it's brilliant. The citizen holds the keys in their hand.
And there's a massive catch here when it comes to quantum migration.
The catch is that the cryptographic capabilities, the specific math algorithms that the chip can process efficiently and securely, are physically baked into the silicon at the factory. The cryptographic accelerators are hardwired. You generally cannot upgrade a legacy classical secure element to support complex, computationally heavy post-quantum algorithms just by downloading a new firmware patch. The silicon simply doesn't have the architecture for it.
Wait, hold on. Let me isolate something you just said. Are you telling me that if a European citizen has a smartphone with a classical secure element today, and the regulatory mandate shifts to post-quantum standards, they can't just update their app? They literally have to throw the physical phone in the trash and buy a new one.
In many cases, yes. To migrate to post-quantum cryptography using secure elements, you are looking at a forced hardware replacement cycle affecting hundreds of millions of consumer devices across Europe. Every citizen would need a new phone, or the member state would have to issue physical, post-quantum capable smart cards to the entire population.
That is an unbelievable logistical and environmental hurdle. I mean, it's politically toxic to tell 450 million people they need new hardware to participate in society. So why not bypass that completely and use the other option? Why not just host the vault in the cloud using HSMs?
Well, hardware security modules hosted in cloud data centers provide a different set of trade-offs. The advantage is that enterprise-grade HSM vendors can often push software and firmware updates to their hardware to support new post-quantum algorithms, like MLDSA. It solves the update problem.
Problem solved then. We use the cloud.
But look at what happens to the trust stack when you do that. You solve the time layer problem, but you sacrifice the ownership layer.
Oh.
If the citizen's keys are generated and stored in a cloud HSM, they lose offline sovereignty. You must have an active internet connection to present a credential or sign a document. Furthermore, it creates massive concentration risk.
You're taking the sovereign digital identity of European citizens and centralizing the cryptographic keys in the data centers of a few massive hyperscale cloud providers.
Precisely. You have outsourced the foundational trust of your society to a handful of corporate entities. The trust stack model illustrates beautifully that you cannot migrate one layer without profoundly impacting the others.
This highlights a dangerous assumption running through corporate IT departments. Do organizations truly understand where trust is created and maintained across their systems?
The white paper argues forcefully that they do not. The prevailing assumption in enterprise IT is a flat architecture mentality.
What do you mean by flat architecture?
They assume that when NIST finalizes the quantum standards, they will just purchase a quantum-proof digital certificate, install it on their load balancers and web servers, and check the compliance box.
They think it's a simple swap. Old certificate out, new certificate in.
But it doesn't work that way because the global ecosystem doesn't upgrade simultaneously. The white paper details the necessity of hybrid cryptography as the only viable bridge during the transition.
Let's explore the mechanics of hybrid cryptography. What does that actually look like in an operational system?
Because you cannot snap your fingers and magically upgrade every verifying system on the planet overnight, you have to ensure backwards compatibility. Hybrid cryptography means you run a classical algorithm and a post-quantum algorithm in parallel.
Okay.
A single digital certificate or identity credential will contain two distinct mathematical signatures. For example, it will have a classical ECDSA signature alongside a post-quantum MLDSA signature.
Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this. It's like negotiating a highly complex international treaty. And to ensure everyone understands it, you write it as a dual language contract.
I like where this is going.
One half is written in Latin, representing our classical algorithms. Everyone currently understands Latin. Yep. The other half is written in a newly invented language. Let's call it Esperanto, representing the post-quantum algorithm.
That is an excellent analogy. An older legacy system that hasn't been upgraded yet receives the credential, reads the Latin, verifies the classical signature, and processes the transaction. It simply ignores the Esperanto.
Right.
But a newly upgraded quantum secure system reads the Esperanto. It verifies the post-quantum signature, ensuring the transaction is secure against a quantum adversary.
It sounds elegant in theory, but consider the operational overhead. If I have to attach both the Latin and the Esperanto to every single document, I am drastically increasing the size of the payload.
You are. Post-quantum signatures, particularly lattice-based ones like MLDSA, are significantly larger than classical signatures. We are talking about going from a 64-byte signature to a 3.3 kilobyte signature. You are increasing the processing overhead on the CPU, you are increasing the bandwidth required on the network, and from a management perspective, you now have to govern two distinct cryptographic life cycles simultaneously for a decade.
And this leads into a massive geopolitical and architectural risk the report isolates regarding the cross-border trust chain. The entire point of IANDAS 2.0 is interoperability. An Italian citizen should be able to use their wallet seamlessly in Sweden.
But the uneven landscape of European post-quantum readiness becomes a critical systemic vulnerability. The transition will not be uniform.
Right.
Some member states have aggressive national quantum strategies. Others are lagging behind. Let's look at a scenario. Imagine a citizen from a highly mature digital nation, say. Estonia travels to a member state that has been much slower to upgrade its infrastructure.
Estonia has proactively migrated its national trust anchors. Their citizens' EUDI wallet is generating these new, highly secure, hybrid post-quantum signatures.
But the service provider in the slower member state, perhaps a regional bank or a local municipal office, has not updated their verifier infrastructure. They don't speak Esperanto.
Ah,
Worse, their legacy software might not just ignore the post-quantum signature. The sheer size of the 3.3 kilobyte packet might crash their parsing engine.
oh wow.
The system looks at the credential, says, I don't recognize this massive block of data, and the verification simply fails. The Estonian citizen cannot rent a car, cannot open a bank account, and cannot access healthcare services.
The interoperability breaks down completely. But there is an inverse scenario that is even more dangerous. What if a citizen from the slower member state is still using purely classical ECDSA signatures, and they travel to Estonia?
In that scenario, if a quantum computer breaks the classical algorithm, that citizen's credentials are fundamentally compromised. Because Estonia is legally obligated under IDES to accept the valid credential from the slower state, Estonia's own secure infrastructure is poisoned by the weak link in the chain.
So the whole system is at risk.
An adversary could forge the classical signature of the slower state citizen and use it to breach systems across the entire continent. The cross-border trust chain is only as resilient as its most outdated node.
This brings us to a part of the report that bridges technology and global geopolitics. The white paper discusses the cryptographic sovereignty gap. This is where the ownership layer of the trust stack collides with global supply chain realities.
It's a critical observation. We need to look at who actually builds the physical components of trust.
The EU is heavily promoting the fact that they're adopting algorithms standardized by NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Right.
These algorithms, like ML-Chem and ML-DSA, are public, peer-reviewed, and patent-free. That is a massive win for algorithmic sovereignty. Anyone can use the math without paying royalties. But the math doesn't run on air.
Exactly. The algorithms are open, but the physical silicon that implements them at scale, the secure hardware processors, the cloud HSMs, the specialized smart card chips that will actually power the EUDI wallet ecosystem, are overwhelmingly designed and manufactured by non-European companies, primarily based in the United States and Asia.
So we have algorithmic sovereignty, but we lack hardware sovereignty. We are relying on an open source recipe, but we are entirely dependent on external powers to provide the ovens to bake it in.
The EU Chips Act is attempting to stimulate domestic semiconductor manufacturing, but as the report notes, fabricating the silicon is only one piece of the puzzle.
What else is there?
To achieve true digital sovereignty, you need European algorithm expertise, European hardware manufacturing, European certification authorities, and European-owned cloud infrastructure. Without that complete vertically integrated stack, sovereignty remains an administrative fiction.
It's an observation of supply chain reality.
Yeah.
If the underlying hardware is externally sourced, you do not possess ultimate control over your trust infrastructure.
No, you don't.
And in a post-quantum reality, the nation-state that achieves the first cryptographically relevant quantum computer possesses an overwhelming strategic advantage. They have the capability to decrypt all that harvested HNDL data. They could potentially identify subtle vulnerabilities in the implementation of the new lattice algorithms before the rest of the world catches on.
Which underscores why the EUDI wallet is not merely a citizen convenience application, it's a projection of geopolitical power. By establishing this standard, Europe is asserting its regulatory right to define the rules of digital participation.
Right.
But if the physical execution of that infrastructure remains vulnerable to state-level quantum adversaries due to supply chain dependencies, it demonstrates that European digital sovereignty can be mathematically overridden.
Okay, we have outlined a fairly harrowing landscape. We have melting cryptographic asphalt, orphan boardroom risks, an incredibly brittle hardware architecture, and global supply chain dependencies.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. If the foundation of trust is this complex and vulnerable, how does an organization actually prove to a regulator, or eventually to a judge in a courtroom, that their systems are secure?
That brings us to the third major structural shift identified in the report, the transition from evidence versus assertion. We're witnessing a massive regulatory-driven paradigm shift in how security is governed. The industry is moving away from treating security as a state and moving toward treating security as evidence.
Let's draw a sharp line between those two concepts. What is the difference between security as a state and security as evidence?
Historically, security as a state meant you followed a checklist. You built the system according to industry best practices, you ran your annual penetration tests, you deployed the software, and you asserted to the auditor, we built it securely. You checked the compliance box and moved on.
I purchased a heavy lock. I put it on the front door, therefore I assert that the house is currently secure.
Precisely. But security as evidence demands much more. It means you have to prove continuously and retrospectively that the lock remained unpicked every single time the door was opened over the last decade.
That's a huge difference.
It is no longer sufficient to declare your security posture at the time of deployment. You must provide the auditable, immutable proof that trust was maintained dynamically in operation.
And this is not just an abstract philosophical debate for academics. The white paper outlines what it calls a regulatory pressure cooker. We are talking about a dense, interlocking framework of European regulations that are converging simultaneously to legally enforce this shift to evidence-based security.
It is arguably the most comprehensive regulatory architecture for digital trust ever constructed. And the trap that executives fall into is looking at these regulations in isolation. You cannot view them as separate compliance exercises. They form a unified net.
Let's walk through the strands of that net. We've heavily discussed IDS 2.0. It legally mandates a level of assurance high for the EUDI wallet. In technical terms, level of assurance high implies resistance to state-level adversaries. Therefore, by definition, the wallet infrastructure must eventually be quantum resistant to remain compliant. Then, layered on top of that, we have the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act.
The CRA is transformative because it mandates security by design and continuous vulnerability management throughout a product's entire life cycle. It shifts liability onto the manufacturer.
Okay, how does that play out?
Consider those hardware chips, those secure elements we discussed earlier. A manufacturer designs a secure chip today, and it might remain active in consumer devices for 5 to 10 years.
So if a hardware manufacturer builds and sells a chip today that is physically incapable of being upgraded to support post-quantum cryptography, and the CRA dictates they must manage vulnerabilities for the product's entire operational life,
they are knowingly manufacturing future legacy debt. When post-quantum algorithms inevitably become mandatory to maintain security, that manufacturer will find themselves in direct violation of the CRA because they cannot patch a fundamental known. The regulation requires organizations to implement risk management measures that are proportionate to the evolving threat landscape. As quantum capabilities become more visible, as threat intelligence reports increasingly highlight the risk, you can no longer sit in front of a regulator and argue that a quantum computer is a science fiction hypothetical. ENISA, the EU Cybersecurity Agency, is already publishing extensive guidance on quantum risks.
the board cannot claim ignorance. The paper trail is already established.
Exactly. And finally, you have DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which specifically targets the financial sector.
What does DORA require?
DORA requires financial entities to conduct advanced threat-led penetration testing. Financial institutions are going to be required to incorporate quantum threat scenarios, specifically simulating the harvest now, decrypt later threat into their mandatory resilience testing protocols. If you cannot demonstrate how your systems withstand a simulated quantum attack on archived data, you will fail your DORA audits.
So let's connect all these regulatory dots, EIS, CRA, NIS2, DORA, to a visceral real-world scenario. Let's look at the legal validity of a digital signature, because this is where the abstract concept of evidence versus assertion gets terrifyingly real for a legal department.
It really does.
I want to build a mock scenario based on the report's warnings. Let's say it's the year 2027. An executive uses their EUDI wallet to sign a massive, highly sensitive, multi-billion-euro commercial merger agreement.
Okay, setting the scene.
It's a qualified electronic signature under IAS 2.0. The law states it has the exact legal equivalence of a handwritten signature in wet ink. Because it's 2027, the underlying infrastructure is still using classical cryptography. Let's say a standard ECDSA signature. The document is signed, hashed, stored, and the merger goes through.
Standard procedure.
Now, fast forward to the year 2035. A cryptographically relevant quantum computer comes online and categorically breaks ECDSA. The math collapses. Now, one of the parties to that 2027 merger decides they want out of the deal. They stand up in a courtroom, point to that digital contract, and say to the judge, "Your Honor, that digital signature from 2027. The opposing counsel cannot prove it is valid anymore. The underlying mathematical foundation is broken. Anyone possessing a quantum computer could have forged that signature yesterday and simply backdated the timestamp."
That is the exact nightmare scenario that keeps digital identity legal scholars awake at night.
I can imagine.
If a quantum computer compromises the cryptographic basis of past signatures, it doesn't merely create an IT security breach. It creates a retroactive legal black hole.
Yeah.
It potentially voids the legal validity, the non-repudiation, of millions of historical, commercial, and civic transactions.
So, put yourself in the shoes of the executive defending that contract in 2035. How do you fight that in court? How do you mathematically prove to the judge that the signature was legitimate when it was made? What becomes the evidence layer of the trust stack in a post-quantum world?
The white paper defines this required new evidence layer as continuous cryptographic observability. It means that simply deploying a new post-quantum algorithm is insufficient. You must maintain a granular, real-time, auditable cryptographic inventory of every transaction.
Walk me through the mechanics of continuous cryptographic observability. What data do I need to bring to that judge in 2035?
You must be able to prove through immutable auditability and rigorous lifecycle management that your specific digital certificates and algorithms were valid and unbroken at the exact millisecond the transaction occurred in 2027.
So timestamps are critical.
Yes. You need secure, independent timestamps that are themselves anchored using quantum-resistant methods. You need comprehensive logging that proves the hybrid certificate used in 2027 was the legally accepted standard at that precise moment in time, and that the certificate had not been revoked prior to the signature.
You have to secure the past against the future.
Yeah.
You have to prove that the lock was structurally sound and uncompromised at the exact moment the door was opened in 2027, even though you acknowledge that the lock is currently broken in 2035.
Yes. Trust decisions in the industrial phase must be verifiable after the fact. If you cannot provide that continuous cryptographic observability, if you cannot produce the logs, the timestamps, the state of the algorithms at the time of signing, you lose in court. Your assertions that we were secure back then mean absolutely nothing without mathematical evidence.
Okay, so synthesizing all of this for the senior leader listening right now, we have painted a landscape of melting cryptographic asphalt, orphaned boardroom liabilities, incredibly brittle hardware supply chains, and retroactive legal nightmares.
It's a lot, I know.
The listener cannot just call up their enterprise software vendor tomorrow and buy a shrink-wrapped quantum-proof suite off the shelf to solve this, can they?
No, absolutely not. There is no magic bullet vendor solution for this. Post-quantum readiness is not a software patch. It is a fundamental structural redesign of how your organization manages the lifespan of its beta and the legal liability of its digital trust.
Which brings us to the operational blueprint. How do we actually execute this transition? The white paper lays out a highly structured 4-phase migration roadmap for organizations. Discover, plan, transition, and operate.
Right.
Let's break these down because this is where the theoretical risk becomes actionable strategy for our listeners. Where does an organization begin?
Phase 1 is discover. And while it sounds simple, it is arguably the most critical and difficult step because you cannot migrate what you do not know you have.
We're talking about building a comprehensive cryptographic inventory.
Yes. You must aggressively hunt down every hidden root certificate, every obscure issuing certificate authority, every embedded cryptographic library in every legacy application across your entire enterprise.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And critically, from a business risk perspective, you need to identify all your long-lived datasets. What encrypted data do you hold today that still needs to remain strictly confidential in 15 years? What digital signatures do your legal teams rely on that must remain legally valid in a decade?
I imagine that in a massive multinational enterprise or a complex government agency, this discovery phase is an absolute nightmare. Cryptography isn't just sitting in one central folder. It is buried everywhere.
It's ubiquitous and invisible. Automated discovery tools and network scanners can help identify traffic patterns, but they often fail to find custom cryptography hard-coded into a 15-year-old mainframe application that processes payroll. The discover phase requires deep manual review of high-risk operational systems. It requires asking developers to forensically examine legacy code bases.
Okay, assuming you survive the discovery phase and you have your inventory. Phase 2 is plan.
In the plan phase, you must ruthlessly prioritize based on risk. High-priority assets are those where the data is highly sensitive and the required lifespan exceeds the estimated time to a quantum computer.
Makes sense.
For identity infrastructure, your absolute highest priorities are your root certificates, your core signing keys, and your long-lived verifiable credentials.
This is also the phase where engineering teams have to make their architectural decisions, right? They have to choose which of the newly finalized NIST standards to implement.
Exactly. The report details the newly finalized standards. You have FIPS 203, which is ML-Chem, designed for secure key exchange over a network. Then you have FIPS 204, ML-DSA, which is the primary, highly efficient standard for digital signatures.
And there's a third one, right?
Yes, finally, FIPS 205, SLH-DSA, which is a very conservative, hash-based backup signature scheme in case vulnerabilities are found in the lattice math.
But as we discussed with the dual language contract in ADO, incorporating these standards requires intense capacity planning. We noted that ML-DSA signatures are massive, 3.3 kilobytes compared to 64 bytes.
And that is a major planning constraint that catches organizations off guard. If your legacy hardware load balancers or your heavily constrained IoT network protocols physically cannot handle a 3.3 kilobyte signature packet without dropping the connection, you have a massive infrastructure engineering problem to solve before you can even attempt to roll out the new algorithms.
Wow.
That is why the planning phase must be exhaustive.
And this naturally flows into phase 3, transition. We discuss hybrid cryptography running the Latin and the Esperanto simultaneously. This transition is clearly a highly staged, delicate process, not flipping a master switch over the weekend.
The white paper recommends a very strict staging order to prevent catastrophic outages. You must start at the absolute top of the trust chain. You migrate your root certificate authorities first, issuing new hybrid root certificates.
Okay, top down.
Only after the root is secure do you migrate the intermediate CAs. Once the intermediate layer is stable, you move down to credential issuance systems, then wallet attestation endpoints, and finally, the vast network of relying parties and verifier infrastructure.
It requires meticulous orchestration. But what really struck me is phase 4, operate. The report makes it clear that the operate phase is not a final destination. Reaching post-quantum compliance is not a finish line where you can fire the consultants and forget about it.
Right, because cryptographic science is a constantly evolving battlefield. The new NIST standards are robust, but they rely on a complex lattice mathematics that are still relatively new compared to the decades of analysis we have on RSA.
True.
There is always the non-zero possibility that cryptographers will discover new, unforeseen vulnerabilities in these post-quantum algorithms.
Which means we might have to do this entire migration process all over again in 10 years. Therefore, the strategic imperative, the core design principle that must govern every IT decision moving forward, is cryptographic agility.
Cryptographic agility is the holy grail of modern system architecture.
Define the mechanics of that for us. How does an agile system differ from what we build today?
Cryptographic agility means a system is architected from the ground up so that its underlying cryptographic algorithms can be swapped out or replaced rapidly without requiring a complete redesign of the surrounding application logic or hardware.
So no more hard coding.
Exactly. Hard coding a specific algorithm like RSA or even ML-DSA directly into a silicon chip or a core software protocol is no longer acceptable engineering practice.
No more baking the mathematical equation permanently into the concrete foundation.
Precisely. You build abstraction layers. You need the capability to issue a central command to your infrastructure. Cease using algorithm A, immediately begin using algorithm B, and have that instruction propagate smoothly across your network without breaking application functionality.
That's a huge shift.
Building that agility now is the only thing that will save organizations from massive disruption when the next inevitable cryptographic transition is required.
So, synthesizing all these operational directives for the decision maker listening right now, your immediate action item tomorrow morning is not to go hire a team of theoretical quantum physicists.
No, please don't do that.
Your immediate action item is to initiate that discover phase. You need to call your CISO, call your head of infrastructure, and demand a comprehensive cryptographic inventory.
That's step 1.
And crucially, when it comes to the ownership layer, any procurement decisions your organization makes today regarding hardware, cloud services, or enterprise software must explicitly include post-quantum cryptographic capabilities and cryptographic agility requirements in the contract.
Absolutely vital.
Because if you buy a massive batch of secure elements today that cannot be updated, or sign a 5-year contract with an HSM vendor that lacks a post-quantum roadmap, you are literally purchasing future legacy debt. You are actively engineering a compliance crisis for yourself under NIS2 and the CRA in 5 years.
That is the most actionable takeaway. Procurement is the absolute front line of quantum readiness today. You secure the future by changing how you buy technology in the present.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening and frankly sobering deep dive. We've covered the fundamental shift to industrial phase digital identity driven by IIS 2.0. We've explored the ticking clock of the time versus trust dynamic, specifically the harvest now, decrypt later threat against long-lived data.
We really went through it all.
We mapped out the deeply interdependent and sometimes brittle nature of our current hardware architectures across the trust stack. And we've outlined the terrifying legal reality of the evidence layer, where under NI2 and DORA, you must continuously prove your historical security posture to regulators and judges.
It's a whole new world.
It is. I want to leave you, our listener, with a final philosophical shift to mull over for your next executive board meeting. Since the dawn of the internet, we have spent the last few decades building digital systems meticulously designed to conquer distance. We built protocols to allow instant, frictionless trust across the globe at the speed of light. We mastered space.
Right.
But the impending reality of post-quantum cryptography is forcing us to realize that the true final frontier for digital trust isn't distance, it is time. Your job as a leader is no longer just securing today's perimeter against today's adversary. Your job is securing the past against the future.
What has become clear from this discussion is that the transition to post-quantum is not something that sits neatly inside a security roadmap or a cryptographic upgrade cycle. It is forcing a broader reassessment of how trust is defined, implemented, and ultimately verified. The trust stack gives that reassessment a structure. It connects decisions that are often made in isolation: identity, cryptography, infrastructure, policy, and places them into a single operational context. That is where the real pressure is going to be built over the next few years as organizations move from planning to deployment. And it's also where the gaps will start to show. Because this is no longer just a technical issue, it's becoming a question of operational readiness, regulatory exposure, and commercial credibility. The ability to demonstrate that your system can be trusted, provably, not just by design, will start to influence procurement decisions, partnerships, and market access. This white paper is intended to surface those realities early. It's part of an ongoing quarterly research series from the quantum space focused on identifying where structural change is already underway and where organizations need to act before it becomes enforced. If you want to understand how this applies to your own environment and where you may already be exposed, the full paper is now available to download at thequantumspace.org. You've been listening to The Quantum Space Innovating Trust. Until next time.
This was The Quantum Space Innovating Trust, produced and edited by Crown Communications.